well. So first, a rather long introduction. When something really bad happens, the government likes to do something that will reassure people that it will never happen again if it's a disaster that's within the control of the government. So this particular picture is from the U.S. in the early 1930s when the Depression hit. The banking system failed, and that brought the whole country's everything to a halt because you can't have a business without banks. And if there was a rumor that a bank might go under due to bad loans, then everyone ran to the bank and took their money out, and then the bank really did fail because, of course, they don't have most of the money on hand. So many banks failed, and the government responded by setting up, back then, something called the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, which guaranteed people that if a bank failed in the future, their money would be insured up to, at that time, maybe $100,000. So this worked so well that in the recent financial crisis, this slide was made before the recent financial crisis, but in the recent financial crisis, people did not take their money out of the banks. They spread it around across several banks, and many banks failed. But society continued to trust the banks. So this worked for banks. What about trust in companies? Okay, not banks, but publicly traded companies, companies that are on the stock market. So we used to trust them, but then in 2000, there was this company that in the 1990s had been very popular on the stock market, Enron. I owned Enron shares. Everyone owned Enron shares. They were an energy services company. And the reason everyone owned them is every quarter they made more money. So it was a very good investment. The stock price went up. And then it turned out in the year 2000, it turned out that all those financial reports from them were false. And it was the people at the top that were saying, you know, cook the numbers, make it look like we made, hide all the losses in the past and hide this quarter's new losses. So eventually the losses were so huge that they couldn't hide it anymore. But by that point, they bought many legitimate companies that failed when they failed, and it caused a lot of suffering, and most of the people at the top got away with it. So a lot of people who knew about this were not prosecuted. So it was a scandal, and the reason it was as bad as this run on the bank is that people realized if Enron lied in those quarterly reports, why should I trust anyone's quarterly reports? And if you don't trust the quarterly reports, you don't know which companies to buy on the stock market. Boy, that would be a real disaster if everyone pulled their money out of the stock market. So the Congress tried to quickly pass a law. It's called the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. That's kind of hard to say, so we just call it SOX usually. And Canada passed a similar law. Japan passed a similar law. I'm sure Australia has a similar law. And the goal of these, just like with FDIC, to restore society's confidence in banks, this is about restoring confidence in quarterly reports. And I'll talk about how it works in the next slide. But meanwhile, people were right. They shouldn't trust quarterly reports because there was a lot of fraud. It wasn't just Enron. There were accountants who helped them hide it up. WorldCom, Xerox, Tyco, Global Crossing, WorldCom. And Enron was actually one of the smaller ones. It's just it was such a shock that everyone remembers it. So that's Global Crossing. WorldCom was actually a WorldCon. This was the head of Tyco. He actually did go to jail, but most of the people at the top got away with it. And India has recently faced the same problem with their big company, Satyam Infotech. Over $1 billion in misstated revenues that didn't really happen. So I'm going to greatly oversimplify SOX and just say two things about it. First is it made the people at the top personally responsible for the accuracy of the financial reports. So they have to sign off on the financial reports. The second thing is that it required companies to keep documents for lengthy periods in a way that would make them hard to tamper with. Nothing's tamper-proof, so I should change that word, but maybe the people who wrote the laws didn't know that there's no such thing as tamper-proof, but in a way that makes them hard to tamper with. So the actual retention period, sometimes it's 3 years, sometimes it's forever, which I really don't know what forever means in our world, but typically 7 years. And it meant that every single spreadsheet, email, so spam filtering becomes even more important. Instant message, other reports. In some industries, they have to keep their phone conversations. All this stuff has to be kept for 7 years. So you can imagine how excited the storage industry was when this law was passed. This was just a windfall. And of course, why are they keeping all this? It's so, if anything's ever turned up that's kind of funny in the financial reports, it'll be possible to trace it back through all these documents. You can subpoena them and figure out what was really going on in the company. Okay. And then there's a huge argument, did SOX work? The companies complain vigorously that it's incredibly expensive to implement this. Lots and lots of complaints, lots of studies now that's a few years old, and maybe half of them say it's not reducing fraud, the other half say it's definitely reducing fraud. So there's still a lot of argument about whether it helps or not. And it's not just reducing fraud, but also helping you track down fraud when it does occur. So there's still a lot of discussion about this.
Why would it not help?
Why would it not help? Well, actually, I have an answer to that, surprisingly. So the people at the top, so fraud can happen at any level. I think if I wanted to go out and do something fraudulent, I'd be really careful and try to cover up what I was doing. But the people at the top, they have this sense of invulnerability if the fraud's coming from the top. And you can see that in the Enron emails where they just freely emailed each other about what they're up to. And maybe you can see that in some of the cases that have been prosecuted since then. It's like they didn't even try to hide what they were doing. And then Illinois has a long tradition of corruption, which I'll touch on in a later slide. There were a lot of mafia things based in Chicago, and as a result, half of our governors go to prison after their term, including the one that won the Nobel Prize for taking all the people off death row. And so the one after that one, we kind of elected him because he was from the opposite party. We only had 2 parties to choose from. So switch party and a completely different name, a seriously ethnic name, a Serbian name that none of us knew how to pronounce when he first started running, Blagojevich. So he got elected. Turns out he's just as corrupt as the previous guy, or maybe more so. And so when Obama was elected president, one of the many things Blagojevich did was he wanted to sell Obama's Senate seat. And I don't mean to imply that Obama is corrupt. Obama's different. So please don't assume that he is, because I don't think he is. But Blagojevich definitely was corrupt. And it was like, what are they going to give me if I put them in the Senate seat? And he's having these conversations on his cell phone and prefacing them with, I think the FBI is tapping my phone. And then he'd go on to talk about these things he was going to do. And he really believed that he could not be touched. So there's this arrogance at the top with these people that I personally, I don't have that alpha leader personality, and I don't feel that I can't be taken down. So that's my answer. I think some of the people at the top, like, do you think Trump, if he wanted to do something nasty, do you think he would worry about it, or would he just do it? I don't know. Yeah, they're risk takers. They are.
So they know there's risk, and it's part of what they're going on.
Yes, yes. Whereas if I were, we'll see an example in a minute about altering birth dates. If I was going to alter my daughter's birth date for some sneaky reason, I would try to cover it up. So I don't have that risk-seeking, thrill-seeking personality.
The term corporate psychopaths, describe this?
Sorry?
Corporate psychopaths, so corporate sociopaths, they don't see themselves as part of society
Oh.
necessarily.
Yeah. jail for up to 10 years. Nobody has hit these maximums yet. These are some of the early fines. I think they're about 10 times bigger. So SEC rule 17A4, 17A4, it's very similar to SOX, but it's for the financial industry, and people use the same type of controls to keep documents for both laws. So that's why I listed that there. And if you watch the paper, people are still getting fined for not keeping documents properly. So I've been picking on companies, but this stuff happens with government too. Once upon a time, President Reagan wanted to nominate this guy for the Supreme Court, and the journalist got hold of his video rental records, and they instantly passed this Video Privacy Protection Act. And they were not thinking of him because actually he had not watched any compromising videos at all, but I'm sure our members of Congress watched lots and lots of things they didn't want to know people about.